Linda Kafka has worked as an aging in place specialist for over 15 years. She brought the Certified Aging in Place Specialist program, better known as CAPS, to Canada many years ago. It's taught through the Canadian Home Builders Association, as is the Adaptive Home Renovation course, which she also developed. Linda is the principal of the Science and Design Academy, leading a team of experts in neuroaesthetics, cognitive architecture, and biophilia. You are about to hear a fascinating conversation with lots of takeaways. Well, hi, Linda. Welcome. It's so good to see you. We always have such a good time chatting together.
Hi, Karen. It's great to be here with you, and thank you for having me on this podcast with you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I know that when we first talked about this podcast, I spoke to you about wanting your top list of things that you would suggest to people who wanted to do home modifications to age in place. And through the process of conversation, you came up with a much better idea. So there are things people have to do even before they get to picking up a hammer and a nail or calling somebody. And I think that is absolutely a brilliant idea. So for anybody who is listening or watching this podcast, this is going to be a terrific one for you because Linda is just such a wealth of information. So Linda, what are your top hits?
Well, before I say that, I want to say, you know what, Karen, we really bounce off of each other so well. You are extremely knowledgeable in this industry. I've been doing it since 2010. And, it's great to have conversation because I think the more people you engage in conversation about your aging in place goals and plans, the more you're going to learn.
Absolutely.
It's so important. And so, often when I get asked to speak on podcasts, it's exactly that. Give us the top 5 or top 10 home modifications that we should be doing. And, at the end of the day, we all kind of logically know, if our doorways are widened, it makes it easier for us to get in and out of them when we have a mobility device, using lever handles for doors so that, our arthritis, if we've got challenges with our fine motor skills, we can, easily open and close those doors or even turn on faucets. And the list goes on and on, lighting, flooring, But where I really want your audience to go is I want to go to a place before you actually do the renovations. There's so much to consider when you say, and actually when we've interviewed, and there's been certainly a lot of surveys out there that talk about, do you want to age in place? And at one point, I think pre-COVID, it was about 80% of people said, yes, I'd like to age in place. And as we got closer to COVID or during COVID, it was 90. And then when we finished COVID, it was 100 people that you'd interview. Every single person would say, I want to age in place. But what does that really mean? And, are you really thinking about the whole process and you yourself as that individual, or you and your partner, are you really committed to aging in place? And so you're going to say, of course I am. Why wouldn't I be? But let's logically look at your space. And so that's what I want this conversation to go towards is, if you've lived in that residence, and I'll give two examples. My mother had lived in her residence for over 60 years before she was forced out because we didn't do aging in place renovations. And I lived in my home for 30 years. We accumulate a lot of belongings, furnishings. We house or we decorate our spaces up. We've got our area rugs and our coffee tables and, and all these furnishings that are not always conducive to aging in place. And so one of the things that I always say to people, if you are truly committed to aging in place, are you committed also to really looking through that lens of aging in place and looking at your environment before you do the remodel and saying, what do I have to purge? What do I need to get rid of? What are the things that no longer serve me? I happen to have a lot of storage in the basement. Things like, pots and pans that I might have used when we had holiday guests coming over that weren't, used on a regular basis, and I would store them. So I'm up and down the basement stairs, going and getting things that I no longer, that we needed. But as I age, I'm no longer entertaining. I don't have the big family gatherings happening in my space. My mother, when she was in her 90s, was certainly no longer doing that. So why are we holding on to all those things? They not only become clutter, but they also add to the potentials of falling, of a whole bunch of other issues that are going to happen. That's one conversation. That's your first conversation, having it with yourself. I don't know, Karen, how you feel about that. If you see that,
I completely agree with you. And when you were talking about the things that no longer serve us, I have my great grandmother's china, the kind of china that you have to wash by hand because it was hand painted. It can't go in a dishwasher. It's in a box. I never use it. My kids don't want it, but there it is. And something has to be done with it, because if I don't do something with it, then when I pass away, my kids have to do something with it. I think a lot of us have that kind of stuff, those kinds of collections, tea services and fine china that we don't use anymore, and clothes that, the stuff that, well, it might fit us if we only lost 10 pounds.
I know that all too well. But the point I'm trying to make here is that we really have to have that honest conversations with ourselves. And, and if that's what you truly want to do, age in place, you can't delay that. That is something that's inevitable. You're going to have to deal with it at one point. And I particularly like to look at, the furniture, the area rugs, things that are going to, potentially cause a fall, a trip hazard. If we fall, are we going to hit that sharp edge on that coffee table that really doesn't need to be there or whatever? That's the first conversation. Now,
and Linda, if I can just interrupt, when we were talking about this before, we were talking about things that our vision may not see quite as well. For instance, glass tables.
Right.
I thought that was a brilliant example that you brought up.
Oh, let me share that story. It's kind of a sad story.
Sure.
I have a very dear friend. He happens to be an artist. He happens to be an art collector, not high-end art collecting, but local artist. And his wife and him, and she's since passed away. They would go out to art in the park shows and things like that, and they would find beautiful pieces for their home. But it extended also to their furnishings. Although he's in his 80s, back in the day, he had, they had a very modern looking space, and they had glass coffee tables, rounded glass edged credenzas and case good pieces, and, the acrylic chairs. And so when she passed away, he kept all of those elements in his space. Obviously, it was their design. It's what they loved. But as he started to get all early onset dementia, his gait started to change, and he didn't get rid of the area rug. He tripped on the area rug and went right into the glass coffee table, and it shattered. And, he did cut himself, not severely, but it was an aha moment for me because, obviously glass is going to be a lot harder as our vision changes. Depth perception, contrast, it almost became invisible to him. And there was no surprise with the area rug that he was inevitably going to fall and trip. And so what a severe situation that could have been had glass shards cut him on other parts of his body, and so don't even want to think about it. He's since realized, I've got to get rid of these glass pieces within my space. And that's what I'm talking about. Like, you really have to assess your environment, not just from the renovation, but the elements that are in there that could potentially harm you if you do trip and fall.
Absolutely.
And that's one of the number one reasons that we end up in the hospital is because of a fall.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And area rugs, you mentioned that. I'm always telling people, get rid of your area rugs.
Or flooring that have, that different types of flooring. So you go from a hardwood to a ceramic to a carpeted area. We all have them in our homes. And so those transitions from going one floor to another, especially as our gait changes and we slow down in our walking, or we're using mobility devices, whether it's a cane, a walker, or even a wheelchair, it's harder to maneuver on them. And so that's another area that you really have to look at is that unified flooring to make sure that, we're not adding to the potential of that,
and falling. Footwear too. We've always got that favorite pair of slippers that has served us well for way too many years. And if you look at the bottom of it, it's shiny. That's not a good thing either. So that's part of purging, is getting rid of the things that can contribute to poor outcomes for you.
And I think the important thing is doing it as soon as you make that decision to say, you know what, I am going to age. We are going to age in this home, and this will be our last home, and we'll do our renovations accordingly. But once you make that decision, that's when you really have to be realistic about purging, and not just, as Karen, as you said, China and all of those pieces and the clothing and all of that, but also the furnishings or anything that really doesn't serve you anymore. If you're not using it, if you're not having the functions, if it's a trip hazard, think about that. So that's the first, having a conversation with yourself and your partner on what that could look like.
What that commitment really is. Right. And, you know, going through even that process, you may discover that that home, just the home itself, no longer serves you. It's maybe
True.
not where you need to be. You know, at some point we may all stop driving. There are so many pieces to it, but that's a very realistic part of the conversation that people shouldn't skip over.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's coming to terms with it. If you don't come to terms with it, it's never going to happen. And it's just going to get delayed until somebody makes the decision for you. So that's the first. Now there's the second one.
That's a really important thing that you say. And I don't want to gloss over that. If you don't make the decision, it will be made. It's just going to be somebody else who makes it. I say this all the time to clients, and I've said it on this podcast before. Decisions are going to be made.
Yeah.
How much control do you want to have or give up?
Mm-hmm. And, you know, and so the next thing before you start the renovation is that you're looking at your estate, you're looking at your home, the equity in your home. You're looking at, you know, if I stay in this home and I love my community, that's usually a number one reason why you want to stay in the area. I love my home. The memories are here. It serves us well. But yes, we have to make the renovations. Often you're engaging, and this is my experience and experience of other people that I've met, but often you'll engage other family members to be part of that conversation. And those family members could be your adult children who stand to inherit your estate at some point. And I'm speaking from experience when I tell you this, is that sometimes there can be a little bit of a pushback from adult children because they don't want you spending the money to renovate your home because they see that as, you know, a loss of their inheritance. And I know this sounds really cruel to hear this. And I know many of you watching this or listening to this podcast are going to go, not my family, because that's the words that came out of our mouth when, you know, when we were having the same conversation with my mother. She was in her late 80s. She wanted to stay at home. The idea, there was only a few areas in the home that needed to be renovated. So it was the entrance area, the bathroom. Those were really only the two areas. Otherwise, most of it served her really well. I think we probably would have switched out her appliances to make them easier for her to use and safer to use. So it wasn't a major renovation, but the pushback came from my older sister, who was her POA, saying, no, mom's not renovating. We are not undergoing a renovation. We are not spending that money. And you know, so what she insisted on was that mom move into a retirement home and be done with all of this. You know, no more having the gardener to come and cut the grass because these were expenses. And what ended up happening is, of course, there was a family dispute. Now both of them are estranged. They don't speak to each other. My mother has a new POA. But in the end, my mother ended up spending so much more going into a retirement home. The cost of that renovation would have been less than 1 year cost of being in a retirement home. And she's been in the retirement home now for 8 years. So think of the expense. And we often don't think of it because when you go into a retirement home, you're often told the base price. You know, in our case, it was $3,500 a month. I'm based in Toronto, Canada. It's not subsidized. $3,500, that doesn't sound too bad. But now you're adding on toileting or escorting or other elements into that. And
You want your hair done. You want your laundry done.
Oh, all of it. And so where we're at now is we're closer to $7,200 a month. And of course that price has gone up, you know, because of COVID and so on. But the point I'm trying to make here is just that there could be family members that might try to persuade you from doing the renovation. Move into a condo, mom and dad. Don't worry about this. But moving into a condo, if you have to renovate the kitchen or the bathroom, I don't want to say good luck because it can be done, but it's extremely difficult.
And actually, that's a podcast that I have talked about doing with Ron Wickman, who is an architect. We talked about condos because they are so prescribed. You know, the bathrooms cannot usually be made wheelchair accessible. They pour the concrete where they pour the concrete, and that's where it is. So very, very challenging.
Yeah, no structural. You can't do anything structural to it. It's more cosmetic. you really are stuck. Those bathrooms are not conducive to people with mobility challenges. You don't even have to be in a wheelchair. Try a walker, even through those spaces. And then they don't, not all of them have the zero threshold shower. So they've got, or, you've got some type of form of step up into that shower area. So you're not switching out one place for a better place. You're switching out one problem for another problem. And try dealing with condo boards and renovating. Now, I don't want you to think that this is impossible, because we do have, especially, every city, every province, every state, we do have legislation and building codes. And so a certain percentage of those multi-units have to be accessible, but try getting one, whether it's a rental or a purchase. Often when people are in them, they don't want to leave them. And when they do have to leave, somebody they know is getting that, because they're premier. They're fantastic, because they are designed for people with disabilities. But there's only a small percentage.
I have friends who are looking to downsize now, and they were looking in a brand new subdivision. So some homes are built, some are in various stages, and there are empty lots. So they were looking through, and, they need an elevator in their home, because these lots are all, 28, 30, 32 feet wide by, I don't know, 60 or 70 feet deep. It's mostly the footprint of the house, really. Mm-hmm. So they need an elevator. They're okay with that. They talked to the salespeople about getting in the front door, and they said, "Oh, don't worry about it. We'll build a ramp. It won't be a problem." And I said to them, you have a 28-foot, maybe 30-foot lot. If you're lucky, there is no room for a ramp. So the salespeople were just saying stuff. They really don't understand accessibility. They're just saying stuff.
You're so right. There's a lot of, when we were going through, sustainability in the built environment, we found a lot of companies doing a lot of greenwashing. It's similar, or whitewashing. It's similar. They're just telling you what you want to hear. But thanks for pointing that out, because one, and that's another consideration, and that was going to be my next point, is the access to your space. It's really important to really assess your home. Can we make this more accessible from the front yard or any entrance to the home? Can we make this accessible? If you live in a neighborhood that has a very steep terrain, I reference perhaps the beaches in Toronto, where you've got really steep hills and homes that are built up onto some of the steep hills, and you've got like 16 stairs going up and no frontage. It's going to be impossible. You're not even going to be able to put a lift in there. Other places are going to have very short frontage. You can't put a ramp on them. But here's the thing is, you don't want, I'm really opposed to the idea of ramps, because although it might be a quick fix, and sometimes that's the only solution, if you have the space, remember, you don't want one it can't be too steep, and they run by the building code. But the other problem is that it screams that a person with a disability lives here. So does that make you feel more vulnerable? Are you the talk of the street because you've now put a ramp in, and Mrs. Smith now can't do the stairs, and she's got to operate she's using a walker or wheelchair? You become kind of that target, not just of potentially a home invasion or something like that, but a target in terms of gossip on the street. And I don't think people want that. You want your privacy, and you don't want your front yard to turn now into, we really shun all those medical looking spaces in bathrooms, but then we allow it on the outside of the home. And so having that conversation is the third one you have to have, is realistically, how are we going to get in and out of our home? Is there a solution in the event that we find ourselves using a cane, a walker, and ultimately a wheelchair? And I'm talking an age progression here. Not necessarily,
absolutely.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily talking about somebody with urgent need that had a car accident. Can we get into that home? Because if you can't, if the design of the home, the amount of stairs, the frontage doesn't allow for that, and there's no side entrance or back entrance, then you might as well stop right there and say, okay, you know what, we're not aging in this home. We have to move to another alternative place. And it could be another home in the same area, but you may have to move. So it's a third decision that you have to make, and a realistic one. I'll give you an example. Again, I reference back to my mom. 5 stairs. I remember standard run and rise on the stairs to building code. And I noticed that whenever she went up the stairs with her walker, half the walker was on the front, half the walker was hanging off the back of the stairs. So right there, there's instability. Like, it's not stable for her. As her mobility changed, she couldn't lift her foot up that 7-inch rise or whatever it was. She couldn't lift her foot up, and I would have to be behind her, literally lifting her foot up to the next step. That's not sustainable. Then she got to a point where she was really no longer mobile and not able to do it. And in order to leave the house, we would have to call, there's the paramedics have a service that, it's not an emergency service, but you can call them, and they have special types of chairs to get people in and out, or they can also have their gurneys that will take people in and out of their spaces. And so now she was finding herself calling the ambulance. It was $180 for the service. They would come, 2 people, put her in a chair, take her down. And of course she was embarrassed because the neighbors were like, oh, why is an ambulance there? You know, and they were watching, and she didn't want that attention driven to her. But that's, you know, a problem that she had. So if you can't enter and exit your home
Independently.
Independently, thank you, Karen, you
Yeah.
become a prisoner in that space. And then you have to rely on services to get you in and out. And that's when loneliness sets in. That's when you can't get out to your appointments that start to, you know, affect your health and so on. So really a lot to consider before you go in and say, renovation time, let's expand the doorways, let's do this, let's do that. So those are some of the things. I don't know, Karen, if you found additional ones, but those are the 3 that really, you know, stick at, you know, are really strong for me. And of course there are other things, like if we have a bedroom on the main floor, that's great. I've often had conversations with people and their adult children that, again, remember, this is about vertical and horizontal circulation through your spaces. So the vertical, bedrooms are upstairs, bathroom is upstairs, mom and dad have to, a kitchen is downstairs, so main floor. So you've got to get up and down the stairs. And often you'll hear people saying, oh, I don't really like the look of, you know, of a chairlift that goes up and around chairlift. Sorry, I'm losing my words today. They often don't like it, but it is actually quite affordable. It really does keep you safe. And, you know, and it serves a purpose. Elevators, if you can afford them, and they are coming down in price, or there's also lifts. There's different types of elevators that you can look at. But you got to look at also the vertical circulation within your home. So it's not just the entry into the home, but how am I getting up to the amenities on the upper level? Or is everything on the main floor? And that's what we're shooting for, is bedrooms, bathrooms, kitchen, all on the main floor.
Right. And so all of those issues that you've just highlighted the last few minutes speak to independence and safety and dignity.
Yep,
really important things.
And ease of use. You want to consider ease of use, and you want to consider comfort, ultimately comfort. And, you know, and so all of that has to be taken into consideration. So again, we go back to, do you want to age in place? Yes, I want to age in place. Okay, before we hire that contractor, these are things that we really have to think about, and discussions we have to have with our family members, so that we're all on the same page, and that we can then move forward with, yes, let's move forward, and we'll move to those next steps. So, you know, I hope that that gives your audience food for thought and opens up conversation.
I'm sure it will. Now, I'm not going to let you off the hook quite so easily, because I know that when we were talking about this podcast, we talked also about some design elements. We were talking about, for instance, flooring and lighting, and you are such an expert with both of those things. Maybe you could speak a little bit about that?
I think absolutely. So we know, you could Google it if you don't believe me, but the statistics in the hospital visits from seniors, the number one reason seniors are going into the hospital in emergency is because of a fall. If you're fortunate enough not to break a bone, yeah, there's going to be some soreness and some recovery time, and, you know, and it's going to scare you. God forbid if you break a bone and you're in your, let's say you're in your 60s, it's about 11 day recovery time in the hospital. The older you get, the longer is the recovery time. And what we have seen, and this is statistics and research, is if you've got, you know, the older you are, or the severity of that break, a hip, if you've got dementia and you're falling considerably, your lifespan shrinks immensely. within 6 months to a year, that individual could be gone. And so you really want to, number one, the most important thing in your space is the safety. And so what we want to do is reduce falls. So we're looking at the flooring and, and changing out the flooring, as I mentioned earlier. If you've got different transitions and different substrates, ceramic tile versus luxury, LVT, the luxury vinyl tiles, or the hardwood floor or the carpeting or whatever it is in your space, you want to make it consistent. Invest the money, even though you look at it and go, but it's brand new. It's been here for like 20 years and it's still brand new because we looked after it. No. Time to get rid of it, because it's about your safety. It's about you staying in your home as long as possible. So that's one thing we're looking at. The most important, I think, is the lighting. So many people fail on the lighting part. And as we age, and I never believed this, back in 2010, 14 years ago, when I first started in this, I never believed that my eyes would change that much, to the point where I really can't tell the difference between black and navy blue or different shades of black. And I really have to pull the bright light or get the phone flashlight out to look at things. Wherever you can add additional lighting, especially in those stairwells, you don't want to have any dark spots. If you can have additional lighting, the more, the better. But you also want to be careful, because sometimes too much lighting will create glare off of the flooring choices you've made, the countertops that you've got, the cabinetry you've got, and glare can be another problem, because it's going to, in some people, glare can cause headaches and problems like that, be really an irritant. Other times it can almost mask areas. And I'm going to use an example at the retirement home that my mom's currently in now. She's 98, by the way. The retirement home has a real pale, light wood floor, laminate floor. The walls are white, so there's not a lot of contrast. And the natural light that comes in from the numerous windows creates such a glare on the floor that people are almost unsure when they walk. And you can see them. They'll hold on to the handle rails, or they'll have somebody assist them. And they don't realize it's the glare that's bouncing, or I should say the workers in the building don't realize it's the glare coming off the floor that's causing a problem for these seniors. So lighting is really critical, and don't overlook that. We often think we've got sufficient lighting, but it can always be improved, especially in stairwells.
Right. And that's a very important point for fall and injury in the kitchen, task lighting. I like that you said it's very important to add light in wherever you can, because
Sure.
that is, getting up in the middle of the night. I still do this, but I recommend otherwise to my clients, because I'm like them. I think I'm not that old, but I wake up at 3 or 4 in the morning. I have to go to the bathroom. I don't turn on the light. I know where I'm going. Well, I have a cat, and, I haven't tripped over him yet, but, that the day could come. But there are lots of motion lights that you can get and install for exactly those purposes, that can light your way all the way to the washroom.
I have one under our bed, and I have to tell you, it's funny, because when I look at it in the daytime and I think to myself, that's not very bright at all. In the middle of the night, when it's pitch black and my husband has to get up to use the washroom, or I have to get up to use the facilities, just swinging our legs over the bed activates that motion light under the bed. And then it guides me, gives me enough light to get to the bathroom. And then when I come out of the bathroom, it immediately detects that there's motion, and you turn the light off in the bathroom, it detects the motion, and the light comes on. There are other places that you can install it. We are seeing designers installing it underneath the cabinetry. So right below the cabinetry in the bathroom. It doesn't have to be a floating vanity. It could be a floor standing vanity. We're seeing it in the kitchen, underneath the cabinetry in the kitchen. We're seeing it inside cabinetry. There's so many great lighting devices that you can get now. Some of them obviously don't need to be wired in. They can be battery operated. Just remember to change the batteries. But a lot of them have long life. But put lighting wherever you can. It's going to help you.
Absolutely. And our listeners should know that this kind of lighting is cheap as chips.
Cheap as chips, yes.
Really cheap as chips. And I've seen a lot of them recently that they don't even need batteries. You plug them into your computer, or whatever you use to charge your smartphone, and plug it into the wall. They're rechargeable that way. And They look really nice because you don't have cords and wires running everywhere, but
Yeah.
they serve such a wonderful purpose.
And if they're motion activated, then that also serves a good purpose too. But I also want to warn. As we do renovations, and we're hearing more and more about these products that are coming out, automated faucets. I mean, how great is that? I don't have to even turn it on. I just put my hands under there, and it does all the work. The water comes out. We're seeing a lot more automation. I just want to kind of plant a seed or make you aware that if you do have a family member that's got early onset dementia and you want to keep them in the home, you absolutely want to keep them in the home as long as possible, because going to memory care is traumatic, not just for that individual but for you. Um, you want to remember those devices. As we start to lose our cognition and our minds change and our memory, we lose our memory. We tend to go back to days past. So if we were accustomed to using faucet handles, that automated one is going to be very confusing. People are just going to look at it like, that individual with dementia is going to look at it like, I don't know what to do. Where's the lever? And so what happens is that they start to feel like they've got to rely more on you. Their level of frustration elevates. They feel less independent. It becomes very stressful. So not all products for aging in place are necessarily good. You really have to look at the progressive condition and work with perhaps an occupational therapist. Maybe you have a PSW that understands how you function within that space, or understands your progressive condition. But you might need to seek advice. What will my life look like, now versus a year from now or 5 years from now, depending on how fast that progressive condition moves. But you've got to take that into consideration, and really not always think that all the technology out there is going to, even though it's designed to make your life simpler, is really going to be good for you.
Very true. And you hit on a really good point, and that is understanding your own disease progression or your aging progression, whatever the case may be. And that means that maybe one of the things you ought to be doing is having a really honest conversation with your healthcare team about your disease progression, or maybe your OT, if you've got that person in your circle, understanding what life is going to be like, not just a month from now, but 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, depending on what your age is. And whatever you're planning on doing, do it for the worst case scenario, because it will serve you all the way along. Would you agree with that?
100%. And you know what? And the other thing too that you have to take into consideration is the individuals that are going to design your space or renovate your space. And one of the biggest barriers that we have in the industry, or I should say in the aging in place category, is the training and the knowledge. So, as Karen might have alluded to in the introduction, is that I was involved with the Canadian Home Builders Association, bringing the idea that we needed our own aging in place Canadianized training here. So I was part of the team and wrote several chapters of the training manual that we train the trades on. But one of the things that you want to consider too is not just the healthcare professional that's going to understand how your progressive condition is, and it could be something as simple as arthritis. How is that going to change over
Right.
years? Or maybe it's your vision. How is that going to change? Whenever trades that you bring in, you really want to make sure that they've got an understanding of this. And what I mean by that is like every trade, any renovator or contractor that you call or designer is going to say, sure, I can do that. I know how to do this. Not a problem. What you want and why you want somebody that's actually understand or is trained in aging in place or trained with like the Canadian Home Builders Association is because they're going to help think for you. Even though they're not a medical professional, they have enough knowledge and experience to say, you know what, this is what your life potentially is going to look like now. This is what it could look like in 10 years down the road. Because you're not remodeling a kitchen, I think kitchens can last at least 20 years, if not longer. This might be your last kitchen renovation. They're going to think for you on the different kinds of pull downs, the reach, the range, all of that. We suffer from, especially women, we suffer from rotator cuff issues, reaching up, pulling down, bending down, pulling out. They have knowledge about all of this too. And so they can really advise you on and make suggestions on products that you could put into your home or renovations that you should be doing. So I guess is the fourth thing to consider is who you're going to bring onto your team, because it is a team, healthcare professional like an OT or a PSW. It's going to be a designer that's experienced in it. It might be the renovator that's experienced in it, and so on. Your adult children might contribute to it. It might be product specialists. It might be an integrator. And if, for those of you that don't know what an integrator is, they deal in low voltage. So any of those people that are hooking up your connected smart home, hooking up the lights so that you just have that command, or hooking up all of those systems in your home. That's what they do. You want to make sure that they have knowledge and that they've got some kind of training in here. And don't be afraid to ask them, where did you get your training from? Did you just Google it? Or did you actually take time to learn it through a program?
And references as well. That would be a good thing, because a lot of them will say, oh, sure, I know about aging in place.
Yeah.
I've told this story before, but it's been a long time since I have, but I know of some people whose aging parents live in another province, so not close with the family, but mom wanted to stay in the home and she was progressing toward a wheelchair. Her mobility was very poor. The kids all got together, gathered up enough money for a bathroom renovation, and she was to have an accessible shower, an accessible toilet, an accessible vanity. So they were showing me the pictures. This goes back a few years, but they were showing me the pictures of some of the items that had been done. And I said, your mom must be so happy to be able to get in the shower independently. And she said, well, no, she can't do that. My sister still has to go over and help her in the shower. And I said, why, if they built an accessible shower? Oh, well, there's a little lip that her wheelchair has to go over. And I was like, oh, honey,
True.
You don't have an accessible shower. And they spent $20,000, which was a lot of money for the family to have gathered up to do this. Yeah. But the contractor, his definition of an accessible shower was not theirs. And if you ask 10 people what their definition of an accessible shower is, you may very well get 10 different responses. So very important to do your research and understand what you need and what you want, and make sure that that is effectively communicated.
Yes. And you know what? And the other challenge that we have out there is the language. So we've got like an occupational therapist and a PSW will say a roll-in shower, where, the builders, the renovators, the designers might say zero threshold shower. Somebody that works in accessibility might say barrier-free shower. So you really need to, have them explain what do they mean by those terms, because ultimately they should mean all the same. But as you just pointed out, Karen, it could be that little rubberized strip that is to keep the water from coming out. That will cause a problem for you to independently use that space. And it doesn't seem like much, but when you don't have upper body strength and you don't have the arm muscles to be able to push yourself over that little tiny rubber,
it's a mountain.
It's going to make a difference, and it takes away your independence. And so language is, and don't be afraid to ask people, what do you mean by that? Don't assume, because all of us can go and Google or go to the dictionary and look up what that word means. But what that word means and what is actually done can be two different things. So get them to explain it, and really, this is going to be your last renovation that you do in that home. You won't be needing to do very many more, but really understand and make sure they understand, and that you're all singing from the same song sheet or reading from the same page. Because if you're not, you're going to be so disappointed. And I'll just share, like, we do a home show at the National Home Show. We do a Healthy Aging at Home pavilion last 3 years in Toronto. And one of the saddest things that I hear is I've got consumers of no urgent need. So they're like myself. They're in their 60s or 70s. Typically, they don't have any visible disabilities. They're just progressively aging. They've got some features that they want to have in the bathroom to keep them safe, like grab bars. And they've expressed, and when I say I've had this conversation with numerous over the years numerous homeowners that have done the renovation, and then the grab bars are installed in the wrong space or place, and they're not installed. They're textbook installed, meaning to like the commercial code, if it was a public building where you've got to service the general public. Meanwhile, Mrs. Smith has a very weak upper body and have a hard time pulling herself in a certain direction up, or Mr. Smith has very weak lower body and a stronger upper body, and so the point I'm trying to make here is that just because the book says it should be that way, or there is no building code really when it comes to accessibility in the home right now, but just because everybody's doing it that way doesn't mean that is good for you. So the message here is that every individual is unique, and your needs are going to be different than my needs and then Karen's needs. And so make sure, and even your own partner's needs, but make sure that it works for you. And that's why, again, if you have that expertise from an OT or a PSW, they're going to tell you, what your strengths, your weaknesses are, and where, and your muscle, we lose muscle mass. So we're not gaining any muscle mass.
It's absolutely worth buying an hour or two of time from an OT to come in and properly assess where the grab bars ought to go, and other things as well. If you've got an OT that you've already worked with, more's the better. But that's a really good tip to make sure that you take use of the benefits that your work might offer. And it doesn't matter how old you are. I mean, we can have these kinds of affirmatives. I just moved into a house recently, as you know, Linda, but what you don't know is that one of the bathrooms has a soaker tub in it. Awesome. But I had a grab bar installed on the outside because I don't want to break a hip getting in and out of that thing. And I had another grab bar installed on the inside on an angle so that I can haul myself up out of the tub.
And funny you should say that, because firstly, to go back to the grab bars, you might not be ready to install them today, but if you do that bathroom renovation, what you want to make sure is that, and it is part of the building code, that at least in Ontario, that you have to block the walls for future installation. And that includes the water closet, the shower area, and then just where your sink area is. So your toilet, your tub, shower, and your sink area, because sometimes you need it over there too. So, if you're off balance or whatever, it's not always just in the shower area. So you might want to look at having them install a whole sheet of plywood behind the walls, because you don't know exactly where that grab bar is going to be installed. And so it might cost you a few dollars more for that sheet of plywood up front, but it'll save down the road when you go to install the grab bars, because then there's no guesswork as to, are we anchoring it into a stud or solidly anchoring this into the walls.
100%. And if people are doing work for you, I always tell my clients, make sure you take pictures of every wall before they close them up.
Yep, I do that too. Now, to the soaker tub, it's interesting. I don't have a place to put a grab bar, but I have, from my mother, I got a tension rod, very much like a curtain tension rod, that goes across. This one goes vertically up, and I happen to be in her room right now, and I'd love to turn the camera around to show it to you, but it's 11 feet high, and it's a really solid tension bar. And she's a person of size, so she's probably in and around 250, around 250, and I think the weight capacity is much higher on that. But what it allows her to do is pull herself up out of bed, so it's got a vertical and then a horizontal arm. And so I don't have places in my bathroom to put a grab bar around my soaker tub. I don't want to lose my soaker tub, but every time I use it, I am extremely cautious getting out, because I'm so afraid of the slip and fall, because it can happen so easily. So I want to install one of these tension rods so that I've got something to hold on to when I step over that tub. Now, if a soaker tub is something that you really want, we're not saying get rid of it.
Right.
What you want to do is you want to get soaker tubs that have more of an edge on it, or a lip on it, so you can rest on it, you can push yourself up on it. Some of them are strong enough that you can actually sit on it. I don't always advise it. You got to get you got to have that conversation with the dealer or the retailer that's selling those, because you don't want it to tilt or anything or tip. But for most part, you don't want those really thin edged soaker tubs, like really thin body on it, because it's just going to be more difficult to get in and out. So, if you want a soaker tub, keep a soaker tub as long as you can, but make sure you've got things like what Karen's done with a grab bar, or like what I'm doing with a tension pole, so that I can get in and so we can get in and out of them easier.
I can offer another solution too. A product that we sell at Brown Healthcare comes from Parsons, made in Ontario, and picture a saddle that goes over the wall of your tub, and then it's got a grab bar attached to the saddle. And I have had one of those in the past at a house that I sold long ago, but I've had one of those. They work really, really well.
I've seen them too.
There
Not
are
regular.
options.
Yeah, there are lots of options out there. And, at the end of the day, especially somebody that has no urgent needs. So you got three categories: no urgent need, like us. You've got people with progressive conditions. So that could be, we've got mobility challenges, our vision, arthritis, might be dementia, Parkinson's, any of those kinds of, there's so many. And then you've got people with urgent need. Those would be, unfortunately, somebody that's had a traumatic injury at any age, could be a car accident, a sporting accident, and now they found themselves a paraplegic or quad. I live more in the no urgent need category. And so, and even for people with progressive conditions, we don't want our places to look institutional. We want them to reflect our personality, our character. We don't want to scream somebody, like I said earlier, somebody with a disability lives here. And what I can tell you, going to all these trade shows, whether it's the kitchen and bath trade show or the furniture industry or others, the building shows, that products are becoming prettier. There's more competitive products out there. We're having choices like we never had before. So there's no excuse not to put these safety type of products in. Invisia has a product that is a grab bar incorporated into a toilet paper roll holder, or a soap dish holder, or it looks like a towel bar. It's got the thickness or the girth that your hand can properly grab over it. And where I'm going with this is that you don't have to settle for the institutional looking spaces. So don't feel that that's what your place is going to look like. And then the other thing I want to point out is sometimes you're not doing it for yourself as much as you're doing it for people that are coming to visit. So if my 98-year-old mother could still, if she could get into my home, which unfortunately she can't, I would be doing it for her.
Right.
And then of course I get the benefit also, but it's not for me. God, no, I'm not aging. I don't need a grab bar.
I'm going to call myself out, and I will give myself the advice I give to my clients, and that is that though I live in the no urgent need category, a fall can change all of that in a heartbeat. Yes. So I am trying to do everything that I can in my home. The grab bars by the bathtub. I've got a grab bar in my shower too, a horizontal grab bar. I'm trying to do all of the things so that I don't become one of those statistics.
And I almost did, not once, not twice, but 3 times when I fell down the stairs. I didn't know my husband loved me as much as he does, because he's so panicked. Each time I fell down the stairs, I fell down it because we have only one handle rail on the right-hand side going down. And I am often a multitasker, meaning, which is not good for me, because I often like to carry a lot of things with me. So I'm carrying sometimes my computer bag. The other day I was carrying my computer bag, my overnight bag. I had the coffee cup, kind of stuck the phone under my arm, and I was kind of maneuvering down. Now that wasn't one of the days I fell, but the times before was similar. The lighting needs to increase. I need handle rails on both sides, and I have to be cognizant of not carrying as much. And I'm not in my 20s anymore. I need to start thinking about, it's not as easy to juggle and carry all that stuff, especially if it's weighted. And I did fall down the last time. I completely missed a step. Like I literally thought I was stepping onto the landing, and I missed one whole step and bang right into the wall. And that just, he was quite upset with me, because he doesn't want to see me. And we hear it all the time. Like you hear celebrities, and there, the one that comes to mind. She was in her New York apartment. I won't mention her name, but she was in her New York apartment, fell down the stairs, and broke her neck and died. And so, is that what we don't want that. We don't want that.
Did our former Prime Minister, Brian Mulroney, not die following a fall? And that was just in very Florida. Recent. Pardon?
In Florida. Thank you for bringing that up. He was in Florida. He was, I think, attending a function or event at a private home. and he fell and he died. So yes, Karen, thank you for bringing that up, because that is a very stark reminder of what it can happen to anyone. And go figure that he would be going to a family gathering, a friends and family gathering, and and fall and die from it. So yes, so it's not uncommon to hear this. It's just really unfortunate, and it's avoidable. And so I really hope that everybody listening, at least their takeaway at least is thinking about their safety and the safety of others that come into the home, and not make it about the appearance. I don't want to grab bar because I'm not getting old. No, you want to make it about safety within the space first and foremost.
And the thing is that if you do think about it ahead of time and take action, you have the time to research and choose the products and materials that won't make your home look institutional. But if you've got to do stuff on the fly because you can't come home until you can get into a house and get into a bathroom and use it independently, you're going to end up with things that do make your home look institutional, and that's not what any of us want.
Somebody else making the decision for you. And
exactly.
And I know this conversation is kind of going in different directions, and I just love it when we talk. But you know what? One of the other things that I'm seeing a lot of mistakes in is the choices, the visual choices. And what I mean by that is like tiles that have a lot of pattern in it. Especially tiles in the bathroom. As we age, our depth perception changes. We need contrast. You need that line almost, some people do it more decoratively, but that line in the shower to kind of distinguish, where the wall is. But what I am seeing is out there in the design world is that, and it doesn't necessarily be design world, it could be the renovators too, choosing the tiles, but they're choosing tiles with a lot of patterning in it. You see it on carpets, on broadloom. And so that kind of can create a problem if you've got vertigo, or if you've got depth perception, or just too much pattern stresses us out. It's part of our human, biology and understanding the brain, and our connection to nature. And so we need that organized complexity, and we need patterns, but we need to make sure that the patterns aren't too much, that they end up causing a problem for us too, because they will lead to falls. They will lead to a whole bunch of other problems that you're going to have.
Absolutely. So, I think our listeners have so many great ideas to take away from this podcast. And I know that we're going to have you back for other podcasts, but just to bring this one to a conclusion, do you have any final words, any words of wisdom that you want to give to our listeners?
Yes. You know what? At the end of the day, it's about your dignity. It's about your independence. It's your life. You have total control when you are in no urgent need, or even if you've got a progressive condition. And so, you really want to think all the elements through. Don't let somebody make those decisions for you. This is about you. Everyone's unique. Everybody needs something different. And, I think that if you take this seriously, and you think about your life and you make those decisions, you're going to really enjoy and the benefits of what you've accomplished by creating that aging in place home. I like to call it living in place as opposed to aging in place. But at the end of the day, you're the one that's going to go, I did the right thing. Don't wait for somebody to make the decision for you, because often those decisions might be self-serving for them and are not going to serve you.
Better advice could not be given. Thank you
Thanks.
so much for joining us, Linda. I really appreciated this conversation. And for our listeners, I will add links to the course, the CHBA course that Linda has participated in. For the record, the course book that comes with that is probably the best course book I have ever seen. I'll include links to everything that we talked about, and I will welcome our listeners to join us on the next episode of Real Life Renos, the podcast.